Lee Warren blends together psychology and sales with his background as a performer to teach others the secrets to being an outstanding business communicator. In an ever cutthroat industry, Lee will give business leaders the skills for making that all-important impact. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Hello, everyone. It's very lovely to be invited. And I'm a bit intimidated following those two brilliant speeches. They're really inspiring, aren't they? Equally, I had goosebumps. So you just heard my background's in really in behavioural persuasive psychology, and it comes from two worlds really. One is sales. I was sales director of a large media firm for quite a long time, but I've also been a performer, a professional magician and mind reader for many years. So you can think of me as an affordable Derren Brown for our brief time together today. So I just wanted to get into a little bit, not just the overall theme of communication, but really what makes great communication, what makes really engaging communication, and particularly in this, this year 2020. Because if there's one, obviously we've learned lots of things, but if there's one thing we've learned about communication, it's that so much of it has shifted so fast, and so much of it really is about attention, especially in the virtual environment. And I think it's fair to say that online, pretty much everybody has the attention span of a 3-year-old and the memory of a 90-year-old. So people who are going to adopt, better communication skills really have to learn how to get attention, how to keep it, how to stand out, how to be memorable, how to be persuasive. So I've got a few very speedy ideas for you that will help to do that. And they're based around a little acronym, which I'll show you, an acronym I rather like, HAMPIE, H-A-M-P-I-E. And the idea behind this acronym is very simple. It's very easy to understand, but the practical implications and application of it are pretty fabulous, I think. So the first bit of HAM really stands for hearts and minds, right? HAM, hearts and minds. And the idea here, and I think this reflects really back on both the two previous speeches that we heard, is that if you're going to be someone who communicates with other people, and whether this is one-to-one in a feedback session, or whether this is speaking to a room of 20, or writing an email, or doing a presentation, it's always wise in communicating to really get an emotional connection first before you hit people with the mind stuff, with the data, content, statistics, and so on. And over again, and particularly this year, the mistake we see people making, especially in business communication, is trying to convince people with processes, systems, stats, content, data. And if we know anything about the world recently, it's that facts and data are not that persuasive. It's really an emotional connection which is persuasive. Now, that's a very simple idea, but think about it in terms of quite how deeply it affects our behavior. If you and I met, and I said to you, which do you think is healthier, better for you, spinach or chocolate and sugary things, I'd be fairly willing to bet you'd probably say spinach was healthier, and I think it is too. But if I've got 50 of you in a room and said, all right, how many of you eat spinach more often than you eat chocolate and sugary things, I'd be fairly willing to bet that would be a minority of people, because we don't really act in accordance with information. We tend to act in accordance. We get influenced more by emotional stuff. And I'm speaking for myself. I just like chocolate more than I like spinach. And, one of you could come up to me in the street and think of how difficult it would be to change my behavior just using information, just communicating with me using facts. You could see me in the street eating a chocolate bar, and you could come up and, keeping your government mandated 2-meter distance, obviously, you could come up to me and say, Lee, don't eat that chocolate bar. It's 2,000 calories. And my brain will say, well, it's only 2,000 calories, right? I will literally change the shape of the universe to suit that emotional prejudice that I've already made. So always trying to engage people emotionally first is such a key tool in communicating. I want to be clear, it's hearts and minds. I'm not saying the mind stuff isn't important. I'm talking about the order in which you do it. And then PIE, P-I-E, stands really for 3, again, very simple ideas. P is for pictures, and pictures in its broadest sense. What we see again and again, and in our two previous speeches there, you heard it again, it's stuff that's visual that tends to affect us as human beings, that tends to move us, that tends to be memorable and credible. Stories, narratives, obviously images, pictures, easy comparisons, imagine if, ... what would it be like if, ... And when we meet people who are great communicators, whether that's in writing or in speaking, what we see over and over again is they're often using very visual language. They're often saying things like, look, where we need to be by Christmas is ... Do you remember when ... So pictures, visual language tends to work really well. The I stands for interest. And again, a very straightforward idea here. If you want to be a great communicator, you have to relentlessly focus on what is interesting to the people you're communicating with. One of the early things you learn as a magician, and it's a really strange fact, this is the only person who doesn't see a magic trick is the magician doing it, right? The magician sees all the stuff that's happening backstage. You see all the secrets and tricks. So one of the skills you have to develop as a magician very early in terms of communicating, getting your idea across, is you have to be able to see the magic trick from the point of view of your audience. And this is one of the key skills of communicators, is really focusing on not what you want to say, but what other people want to hear. And then the last one, E, is for enthusiasm, probably my favorite word in the English language. And the idea here is very simple. If you want to be a great communicator, you have to believe your own messages. You have to believe it deep down, and particularly in this virtual environment, because weirdly, this online thing, it's sort of more intimate, actually, than the real world. We're a little bit closer to the camera. It's easier for people to hear the tone of our voices or to see what's going on in our eyes. And people are very good at knowing when we don't really believe our own message deep down. So really what I'm talking about is not just what you're saying, but really how you're framing what you're saying, or how you're framing what you're writing. Framing is a very powerful idea in communication. It's basically the idea of, if I've got a glass of water, cheers, you assumed it's water. If I've got a glass of water, is it half full or is it half empty? Well, it's both and it's neither all at the same time. You'll just see it differently depending on how I choose to frame it. I came across a wonderful piece of framing recently on Twitter. As you know, in the United Kingdom, we're all mad about elections. We love elections. And there's a Twitter account that reposts the results of elections and polls and surveys. And this poll was put on Twitter. I found it really fascinating. On a certain day, just over 1,000 people were asked the following question. In the United Kingdom, should we reduce the voting age from 18 to 16? Notice the language. Should we reduce the voting age from 18 to 16? And as you'll see, 56% of people said, no, we should not. On the same day, the same number of people were asked the following question. Okay, should we give 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote? And this time, 52% of people said, yes, we should. You're intelligent people, you've got the point by now. It's exactly the same question, right? It's exactly the same question, communicated, framed in two totally different ways, and you get two very different results when you do that. Now, we live in the real world. Of course, humans aren't robots. You can't always predict how people are going to react, but great communicators know the way that you frame your communication can be often as important as the communication itself. Now, in terms of you, in terms of yourselves, one of the best ways of framing anything for other people is to always think in a certain way. And the nice way to remember this is to imagine you're at a networking event and just in your own mind, answer the following question. Imagine I've walked up to you and I've said, hello, what do you do? Right, hello, that dreadful networking question. Now, when you ask 100 people this, you sort of get back lots of job titles usually. So you get things like marketing manager, finance director, and so on. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong about that. But if you think about it deeply, that's a very poor way actually of framing what we do, because often our job titles are not what we do, they're just the method we use to deliver value. So my job title is keynote speaker. Well, so what? That just describes the fact I speak. It doesn't really describe the value that I deliver by speaking. So I developed a technique which is great fun to use, and it's to fill in the second half of this sentence. At the heart of what I do is a simple idea, ... Obviously, you don't say ... right? You fill in the ... has happened. But what this does, it drives you sort of towards value rather than processes and systems. And if you can do this with your job title, you can do it with anything. I'll give you a very quick example from my background as a performer. When I used to do magic a lot, I used to do a lot of weddings, and they're lovely gigs to work at. And about a year before their wedding, I would always have the sales meeting with the wedding couple, and they would always say, Lee, what kind of tricks would you do at our wedding? Now, if you think about this in terms of real communication, they're not actually asking that question, I don't think, because that's just a system level question. That's a process level question. They're really asking about trust. I think they're really saying, can we trust you? This is the most important day of our lives. Can we trust you? Now, if I don't understand that, I'm going to answer at the level of fact, at the level of information. And I'm going to say, well, I do card tricks and coin tricks and mind reading tricks. And they'll say, well, thank you very much for that emotionally unengaging information. We will speak to some of your competitors and go with whoever's cheapest. Or I could use this technique instead. I've never said this out loud to a wedding couple. I'll just do this tongue in cheek for fun today. But when a wedding couple say, well, what kind of tricks would you do at our wedding? I could say, well, it's not really about the tricks, you know. At the heart of what I do is a simple idea. I'll make your wedding much better than your sister's was. I've never actually said that out loud to a wedding couple, but I hope it made you smile. But even though that's a really facetious example, a really tongue-in-cheek example, there are two really important things in that answer. One is it does speak directly to value. Who doesn't want the best wedding anybody's had? And the other is it's visual. It's easy to understand. You don't need to do any mental work to understand that answer. And that's why I hope lots of you smiled when you heard that answer. And it's a strange thing. Things that are easy to understand are easier to believe. Messages that are easy to picture get remembered more. They get referred more. So it's one of the key skills to be able to do. So in my very brief time together, I hope that's given you two ideas. One is stick to ham pie whenever you can, stick to ham pie. And the other is always try and frame your communication as well as you can. Get emotional connection and go for value as often as possible. Those are my ideas for you today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much.